The morning tea was still warm when Grace Turner vanished in the riverside town of Havre de Grace, Maryland, population 6,203. The morning of July 18, 1967, arrived with a clear sky, church bells echoing over the red brick rooftops along the Chesapeake. At 10:15 a.m., the family's neighbor, Mrs. Alice Morton, looked through her kitchen window and saw Margaret Turner walking her 4-year-old daughter across the narrow street leading to the central post office. Grace was clutching her favorite red cloth doll, a gift her father had sent back from his voyage offshore the previous week. The elderly woman could still see the child's white dress swaying in the sunlight until the mother and daughter disappeared behind the green-painted wooden door. What happened in the next 10 minutes would haunt Maryland for nearly half a century afterward. Before diving deeper into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the latest cases. In the summer of 1967, the town of Havre de Grace, Maryland, still retained the classic peaceful charm of the eastern United States, where red brick paved streets ran along the Susquehanna River and church bells blended with the distant sound of trains. The residents lived slowly, still greeting each other every morning, still believing that the world out there might be chaotic, but not here. The Turner family was also within that circle of stability. Margaret, 27 years old, a librarian at the Central Library, a cautious and gentle woman with a habit of jotting everything down in a small notebook. William, 32 years old, a naval officer stationed at Fort Meade, coming home every 2 months, and Grace Turner, the 4-year-old blonde-haired, blue-eyed daughter who always carried her red cloth doll, named Annie, like a real friend. The small house on Union Street always echoed with the laughter of the mother and daughter, along with the smell of coffee and the radio playing the morning news. They had a regular weekly routine, writing letters to the father away from home. On Tuesday noon, July 18th, the weather was clear and humid. Margaret held her daughter's hand as they walked through the park to the central post office to mail the 46th letter. On the sidewalk, old Ford cars were parked close together, a few locals lined up at the counter. In the waiting line, Grace curiously looked around, her big bright eyes reflecting every movement. A brown-haired woman, around her 30s, wearing a floral dress, standing in front, turned down, and smiled at the little girl. She bent slightly, said something that made Grace laugh, then lightly touched her hair. Margaret only glanced briefly and smiled politely, seeing nothing unusual. When it was her turn, she bent down to sign the mailing receipt, taking just a few seconds. When she looked up, the line had thinned out, and Grace was no longer standing beside her. An empty feeling hit like a heavy silence. She called her daughter's name, first softly, then louder, then screamed in the quiet room. The people around looked at her in surprise. Someone said, "The kid probably ran outside." Margaret rushed out the door, looking down the street, no small figure in the glaring sunlight. She ran around the post office, through the park, past the nearby grocery store, asking everyone, but no one had seen anything. In her bag, the red cloth doll lay still, the thing Grace had forgotten after holding it tightly just moments before. As the sun tilted down, Margaret sat slumped on the steps, sweat and tears mixing. She ran home, hands trembling as she picked up the landline phone, dialed the local police switchboard, and said through sobs, "My daughter has been kidnapped." On the other end of the line, the duty officer only heard intermittent breathing, a few scattered words, then the line went dead. An emergency call was immediately transferred to the nearest patrol unit. Less than 10 minutes later, sirens wailed on Union Street, blue and red lights sweeping over the roadside trees. 2 police cars screeched to a stop in front of the Central Post Office. Police Chief Raymond Holt, a man in his 40s with a seasoned, calm demeanor, stepped out, nodding slightly to signal his team to deploy. Margaret Turner was found sitting on the ground by the steps, her clothes dusty, hands clutching her daughter's red doll tightly, eyes blank as if no longer aware of anything around her. A young police officer knelt beside her, asking urgently, but Margaret's voice was so weak it was almost inaudible. Holt signaled for her to be moved to a stone bench in front of the post office, while he directed the area to be sealed off, ordering residents to stay away from the scene. Yellow tape was stretched across the entrance, a police car blocking the road. Inside the post office, the staff still on shift were bewildered, gathering by the transaction counter, saying the little girl had been standing there less than 5 minutes before disappearing. One remembered a strange woman, brown hair, floral dress, carrying a leather handbag, standing near the mother and daughter. She left the line right before the child vanished, the transaction clerk affirmed. At the street corner, a delivery driver said he had seen a beige Chevrolet Impala, engine still running, then driving away from the area at the same time. Holt ordered all statements to be recorded and estimated times marked on a map, temporarily placed on the Jeep hood. As darkness began to fall, streetlights turned on dimly yellow. He ordered the search radius expanded within 2 miles. 3 patrol teams were divided into 3 directions: the park along the Susquehanna River, the eastern residential area, and the row of old warehouses on the town outskirts. Radio chatter sounded steadily, flashlight beams sweeping over low bushes. Local residents, upon hearing the news, voluntarily brought lamps and dogs to help, spreading out along the main roads. They called Grace's name into the night wind, the calls echoing then fading in the damp cold air. At the police station, Margaret sat on a chair, hands ice cold, still unable to believe what was happening was real. On the table, Grace's doll was placed carefully next to a glass of water. She recounted everything again. They arrived at the post office near noon, the strange woman, a few seconds turning away, then no sign of her daughter. Holt listened attentively, occasionally pausing to ask small details, his eyes flashing concern. By nearly 10 p.m., the first search groups returned, clothes soaked, reporting no traces found. No scrap of cloth, no footprints, no additional witnesses. The weather turned colder, river wind blowing stronger, light rain beginning to fall. Holt stood before the newly set-up information board, looking at the little girl's photo cut from the birth certificate Margaret had just provided. A small face with bright eyes, blonde hair tied neatly on both sides. He knew time was against them. When the clock neared midnight, he decided to expand the scope further to the southern connecting roads. Temporary checkpoints were set up at the Susquehanna Bridge and Route 40. A group of officers continued scanning under the harbor, where boats rocked in the wind. Through the glass, Margaret watched them, her small shoulders shaking each time a siren echoed. She didn't leave the station, refused to go home. When Holt returned, holding a stack of temporary reports, he could only sit beside her and say softly that there was no new information. The room fell silent, only the rain tapping on the tin roof and flashing lights outside. In the corner wall, the whiteboard had the only line in green chalk: Grace Turner, 4 years old, missing without a trace. By the next morning, when the night's raindrops still lingered on the Havre de Grace police station windows, the duty room received a response from the FBI office in Baltimore. Chief Holt's urgent report sent overnight had been received, and a team of federal agents was assigned to coordinate the investigation because the disappearance might involve interstate kidnapping. 2 black government cars arrived in town mid-morning, federal plates drawing curious residents along the post office entrance. The FBI team of 4, led by Supervising Agent Alan Rhodes, quickly met with Holt in the police department's temporary conference room. On the table, notes from the previous night were stacked, the town map spread out with areas marked in red chalk. Rhodes requested to review all witness statements again, while scanning all details related to the beige Chevrolet Impala. They determined this was the most reliable lead, as this vehicle type was common in the East in recent years, but only about 24 registered in Harford County. A group of investigators began contacting the State Vehicle Registration Office, cross-referencing chassis numbers with current owner lists. By early afternoon, the list was narrowed to 14 names, including 12 men and 2 women. Both women lived alone, one partially matching the witness description: Evelyn Collins, 34 years old, a nurse at Havre de Grace Hospital. Personnel records showed Collins had submitted a one-week leave request, starting the exact day Grace Turner vanished, with the reason visiting relatives in Virginia. What caught the team's attention was information that she had miscarried the previous fall and hadn't returned to full-time work since. Rhodes noted in the margin of the file, female, single, psychologically vulnerable, fits profile of suspect capable of substitute behavior. At the same time, another group was sent to cross-verify information at the hospital. Collins' colleagues described her as kind, quiet, very attentive to patients, but recently often taking sudden leaves, citing health reasons. Another nurse said Evelyn had mentioned wanting to adopt, but her application was denied due to financial issues. Those small pieces made the picture of her clearer in the investigators' eyes. Meanwhile, Chief Holt had the residential area where Collins lived scanned, a small street about 3 miles from the post office. Neighbors described her living alone in a 2-story house, rarely having visitors. Police found no signs of crime, but the timing and characteristic coincidences couldn't be ignored. Rhodes and Holt agreed need to thoroughly check Collins' background while obtaining a search warrant before any evidence could be erased. In the afternoon, the investigation team held a final meeting in the small room, weak light filtering through the window, the air thick with fatigue. Documents were passed hand to hand, copies of the Impala file, Collins' work schedule, leave application, hospital evaluation notes. An FBI agent underlined a key detail: the car registered to Evelyn Collins, 1965 model, light beige, matching the witness description. Rhodes decided to send an urgent request to the county court for a search warrant, while assigning 2 agents to coordinate with local police to monitor the Collins house area overnight. When the room clock hit 5:30, Holt looked at the map circled in red and slowly said, "If something happened, the key is in this house." The group fell silent, ballpoint pens clicking on the table. Outside, the last rays of afternoon sun shone on the sign. Grace Turner, 4 years old, missing, the chalk line still intact on the old board, like a reminder that the investigation had now entered a new phase, where every inference must be verified, and every name on the list could hide the truth. On the morning of July 20th, 2 days after Grace Turner vanished, the search warrant was officially approved by Harford County Court. Chief Holt, along with the FBI agent team, led by Alan Rhodes, headed to house number 11 on Riverview Street, where Evelyn Collins lived. The 2-story White House sat back in a quiet, narrow road, walls covered in ivy, upper windows closed tight. When they arrived, Collins was watering plants in the yard, her face strangely calm. She opened the gate when informed of the warrant, showing no strong reaction, just asking softly in a hoarse voice, "Can I know what's going on?" Rhodes presented the warrant and requested cooperation, while 2 officers entered to check inside. The living room was neat, meticulously arranged, like a model home in a magazine, every item placed precisely, no signs of hasty activity. The kitchen was clean to the point of being chilly. No cups or dishes, except 2 glasses on the shelf. In the bedroom, the bed was smooth, closet organized by color. No children's items, no toys or strange scratches. A forensic technician knelt beside the bed, using a UV light to scan the floor. No blood or fluid traces detected. Meanwhile, Holt with another officer checked the garage behind the house. The beige Chevrolet Impala sat still in the dark. Body lightly dusted, door unlocked. They opened the back door, shone a flashlight on the brown leather seat, noticing a thin strand of hair caught on the surface. The strand was golden blonde, very small, loosely stuck on the seat back. Holt used tweezers to pick it up, placed it in a sealed envelope, labeled E1. He stood silent for a moment, eyes heavy. This detail could be meaningless, but it could also be the first piece in a chain of evidence. The technicians recorded the license plate, chassis number, photographed the entire interior. The trunk was empty, no unusual stains, just a thin folded blanket and a plastic flower vase. Returning to the living room, Rhodes continued interrogating Collins. She sat straight-backed, hands clasped, voice calm to the point of being hard to read. She said she had left home yesterday morning to go to the supermarket, then to the hospital to pick up leave papers, never went near the post office area. When asked about the car, she confirmed driving along the main road that morning, but only to get gas. No details matched the time of Grace's disappearance, but no direct evidence contradicted it either. Meanwhile, investigators scanned the work log, discovering she had indeed submitted leave 3 days before the incident, approved validly. The story made the situation more complicated. Everything was reasonable, except the suspicious timing overlap. The next-door neighbor, Mrs. Dorothy Klein, stated that morning she saw Collins drive away around 10 o'clock, return very late when it was dark, and leave again the next day. She remembered clearly because her husband was sick that day. She stood at the door all afternoon. When asked if Collins had anyone with her, Mrs. Klein shook her head, saying she saw a figure in the car, but couldn't tell who. Each statement was recorded in the minutes, handwriting neat and even. In the garage, the tech team continued lifting fingerprints from the steering wheel, dashboard, and door handles, while collecting a few small fabric fibers stuck to the seat legs. No foreign traces, no blood, no signs of struggle or confinement in the house. Outside, a crowd of neighbors gathered at the street turn, whispering. Many didn't believe Evelyn could be involved in the disappearance. They said she was kind, helpful to neighbors, had babysat for a few families around here. But for Holt and Rhodes, that very calmness made them more wary. They concluded the search near noon. As they left, Collins stood on the doorstep, face showing no fear or indignation, just a hint of fatigue. Rhodes thanked her for cooperating, then signaled 2 officers to pack up the evidence. The envelope containing Hair E1 was sealed, signed by both sides. At the command vehicle, Holt wrote in the report, "No clear evidence found, except suspicious hair sample, hold for analysis. Recommend surveillance of subject Evelyn Collins for 72 hours." Rhodes agreed, ordering discreet monitoring, 2 agents alternating watching the house from a civilian car parked opposite. Headed, say, left Riverview Street, the sky was overcast gray, thin raindrops falling on the car windows, reflecting the image of the house standing silently among the trees. Inside the vehicle compartment, the evidence envelope was placed in a metal box, sealed with red tape. Holt sat pensively looking out, knowing they had touched something, though small, but it could open the first investigation direction since the case began. In the end-of-day report sent to FBI Baltimore, Rhodes noted clearly, no crime traces, no coercion evidence, but suspect's behavior and circumstances indicate high involvement possibility. Recommend continued surveillance, gather more data before reinterrogation. The report was coded GT67 primary lead. As the sun set, the Chevrolet Impala in Collins's garage still sat motionless, reflecting the faint light of the afternoon. No one said it, but the whole team understood this case might not simply be a lost child, and the small hair wrapped in that envelope might be the only thing left to prove it. Immediately after the search of Evelyn Collins's home concluded, Sheriff Holt and the team of FBI agents agreed to expand the search scope to the entire northern area of the town. On July 21st, a bulletin was issued from the Harford County Sheriff's Office, calling for residents to volunteer in supporting the search operation for the girl Grace Turner. Within the morning alone, more than 200 people signed up to participate, including rescue personnel, reserve police, firefighters, scouts, and local residents. The command team set up a coordination center at the Havre de Grace High School football field, turning the location into a temporary logistics hub. On a large map pasted on the wooden wall, each area was marked with red pins, divided into 12 subsections for assignment. Jeep vehicles, canoes, and helicopters from the State Patrol were mobilized, along with 10 service dogs, trained specifically to track the scent of young children. Local media were present, running daily reports, turning the case into the focal point of the entire state. Early in the morning, groups of people set out, wading through the damp forests along the Susquehanna River, checking every abandoned house and old barn. Helicopters circled the sky, sweeping searchlights down onto the sandy banks and grassy areas along the river. At the dock, Rescue divers searched the riverbed, scanning the strong whirlpool curves, but found nothing except a few scraps of debris. In the first 3 days, dozens of leads were reported, but most were false. A farmer on the outskirts of Elkton said he had seen small children's footprints in the mud after a rainstorm, but when the investigation team arrived, the traces had been nearly erased. Another woman insisted she heard strange crying in the western forest, but when the patrol team checked, they only discovered a wild ferret den. Each lead evaporated like steam. The teams had to work in constantly changing weather conditions, scorching hot during the day and cold and damp at night. Tired faces, dark-circled eyes, shoes caked in mud, but no one gave up. Margaret Turner was present every day at the coordination center, standing silently staring at the map on the wall, holding a small photo of her daughter. William Turner was allowed to return from Fort Meade base after his unit learned the news. He went straight to the scene, silently joining the search team along the forest edge. The couple rarely spoke to each other, only exchanging heavy glances. Sheriff Holt, who had barely slept for a week, stayed constantly at the command table, updating every report. He knew that the longer time dragged on, the smaller the chance of finding the child safe. In the second week, the search area was expanded all the way to the Pennsylvania state line. Road patrol teams were deployed along Route 40 highway to check every suspicious vehicle. Police posted flyers with Grace Turner's picture at gas stations, post offices, and roadside restaurants. Every morning, the sound of helicopters echoed through the mist. Dogs barking reverberated through the dense forest, mingling with people calling to each other in the vast silence. A few traces were noted, a piece of white fabric similar to the material of Grace's dress. But quick testing showed no match. A child's shoe was found about 5 miles from the scene, but the size was much larger. Small hopes kept sprouting up then flickering out. By the end of the third week, the search force was exhausted. The press began shifting focus, questioning the competence of local police management. Some articles hinted that the case might be child missing due to family negligence, putting heavy pressure on Margaret and William. In front of their house gate, reporters camped out, cameras snapping continuously whenever a police car stopped by. Margaret barely left the house, her body depleted, relying on sedatives. William tried to stay calm, but every night he went out to the yard, sitting for hours on the railing, looking down at the road where his daughter used to ride her tricycle and play. When the official search deadline closed on the 21st day, Holt held a press conference at the coordination center. He announced that the large-scale search operation was temporarily suspended, with no signs of life or clear evidence of crime found, but all data indicated that Grace Turner could not have left the area on her own. The final report stated, abduction possibility, with intentional elements, perpetrator unidentified. The paper was stamped, filed under number MD 478, GT 67, marking the turning point when the case was transferred to federal crime investigation. As the teams withdrew, the sky was thick with moisture. The high school field stood barren, only the wooden signs listing each searched area remaining. A truck carrying equipment left, its wheels rolling over the wet grass, leaving deep ruts. Holt stood watching, silent. He knew he had to deliver the failure news to the Turner family. When he arrived, the house door was still closed, the kitchen light on. William opened the door, his face rigid, not asking, just looking into the sheriff's eyes and understanding everything. Margaret stood behind, clutching her daughter's photo tightly, eyes unblinking. No one cried, only a prolonged silence between them. A few hours later, when Holt returned to the station, he wrote the final line in the day's report. Search operation concluded. No results. Victim considered missing due to abduction. In the hallway, the radio news replayed the announcer's voice, mentioning Grace Turner's name, now a symbol of a case that shocked the entire state, and also the first crack shattering the peace that had enveloped this town for many years. 3 days after the official search operation closed, the Havre de Grace Sheriff's Office received a short notice from the local hospital, Evelyn Collins. The nurse who had been on the suspect list had submitted a resignation letter and left the town. The letter was written hastily, with the reason stated as caring for ill mother in Richmond, Virginia. The hospital secretary confirmed she submitted it early in the morning, before anyone arrived, and packed her belongings in just 1 hour. When police arrived to check, the house on Riverview Street was still locked, curtains fully drawn. Inside, furniture was neat, no signs of hasty departure, only missing a few personal items and administrative papers. The garage was empty, the beige Chevrolet Impala gone too. Holt had neighbors questioned. They said they saw Collins drive away from the house the previous afternoon. No one with her. An elderly woman clearly remembered the car light shining through her living room window while she was sewing, around 7 in the evening. The investigation team sent an urgent telegram to Virginia police, requesting coordination for verification, but 3 days passed with no response. Richmond was crowded, near many interstate routes, making tracing nearly impossible. No gas receipts, no rest stop traces, no traffic cameras captured the car. FBI agents in Baltimore also scanned temporary registration systems and nearby medical records, but no one named Evelyn Collins was recorded as admitted to hospital or renting a place during that time. Some thought she might use fake papers, change her name, or move to another state. Holt kept a team monitoring for a few weeks, but results were only empty reports. Meanwhile, public interest gradually cooled. The press stopped mentioning the disappearance, residents returned to daily life, and Grace's photo on the post office poster faded with rain and sun. William Turner returned to base, trying to continue duties, while Margaret barely left the house, sitting by the window each day looking down at the old street. Local police cleared the coordination station, storing evidence in the Central Archive. The sealed blonde hair labeled E1 still lay in the brown paper envelope, unable to be analyzed because DNA testing technology was still too primitive. Rhodes, the FBI agent in charge, returned to Baltimore, writing the summary report. Insufficient evidence for prosecution, primary subject left the area, file status, investigation suspended. Holt read the copy, silently signed confirmation. Before leaving the office, he passed the bulletin board, where Grace Turner's photo was still pinned with 4 small tacks, the paper edges starting to curl. He paused for a few seconds, then removed the photo with his hand, put it in a separate envelope, and stored it in his desk drawer. That day, the evening radio news read only a brief segment: investigation into the disappearance of the 4-year-old girl in Havre de Grace, suspended due to no new leads. The town sank into silence. Summer ended with heavy rains, washing away any remaining traces of a search that once shook the entire state. In the Central Archive, the 17-page file coded MD 478 GT67 was placed in slot 3, second shelf row, among hundreds of others. A small sticker in black print: unresolved case. No one said it aloud, but everyone understood that Grace Turner's case, at least at that time, had fallen into an endless silence. In 1970, nearly 3 years after Grace Turner disappeared, the case file remained in complete stasis. No new statements, no additional witnesses, and suspect Evelyn Collins still left no trace. The FBI office in Baltimore conducted a review of all unsolved child disappearances in the area, with file MD 478 GT67 classified into the group needing recategorization. After an internal meeting in March, the case was officially reclassified as unresolved child abduction, a term for cases with possible abduction but lacking prosecution evidence or perpetrator identity. All investigation documents, scene photos, witness statements, and evidence were compiled, stamped red cold case file. At that time, Agent Alan Rhodes had been transferred to another branch. His replacement was young Agent Thomas Brooks, 27 years old, who had joined the unit less than a year earlier. Brooks received the thick file, reading it through 2 nights in the old FBI Baltimore office, where the smell of paper and metal dust mixed. He noted in pencil the points to remember: no physical evidence confirming crime. Sample hair E1, only evidence, unanalyzed. Current technology cannot determine DNA. In the report to superiors, Brooks recommended continuing to preserve the sample in sealed conditions to avoid damage, hoping one day technology would advance enough to analyze it. The proposal was approved, and evidence E1 was sealed in a glass tube, with certification paper sent to the cold storage in the Federal Evidence Archive in Washington. Brooks went there to supervise the sealing, signing the final label himself. He knew he could do nothing more than keep everything intact. The day the file was officially moved to storage, he wrote in his work log, "No leads, no subject, no conclusion, but must preserve evidence, as it's the only thing left that can tell the truth." In Havre de Grace, that spring came and went quietly. The town seemed to have forgotten the case that once shocked the state. Grace's photo, once posted at the post office, had been replaced by an old car for sale ad, and the Turner house still stood silent by the river. Margaret lived reclusively, rarely talking to neighbors. Every year on July 18th, she still lit a small candle on the windowsill, ignoring passers-by, looking with pity. William continued duty at sea, rarely returning, and the distance between them grew with the years. Elsewhere in the massive FBI archive building, the box labeled Grace Turner, Missing Child 1967, was neatly placed on the steel shelf with hundreds of other files. Fine dust covered the gray hardcover, fluorescent lights casting pale glows through the aisles. New employees sometimes saw the girl's name, but no one remembered the story behind it. To the system, it was just a string of characters on paper, MD 478 GT 67. To Brooks, it was the first case in his career that made him feel the helplessness of investigation. He kept a copy of Grace's photo, placed in his personal file, as a reminder that sometimes justice doesn't come in human time, but in the time of patience. On his last day at the evidence storage, Brooks rechecked the hair sample tube seal, confirmed stable condition, then wrote the final line in the record: "Preserved, awaiting future analysis." In the room corner, the old fan rattled, blowing a bit of paper dust through the dim yellow light. No one in that small room knew that ordinary line would become the starting point for a journey lasting decades later. But at that moment, Grace Turner's case officially entered the long sleep of a cold file, where the truth was sealed with what humans could not yet reach. After Grace Turner's case was filed as a cold case, time passed quietly, as if nothing had ever happened. In 1971, the FBI Baltimore office changed personnel. Agent Brooks was transferred to another branch. The girl's file moved to the deepest storage level, left with only cold labels and dusty metal shelves. In Havre de Grace, winter came and went, leaving empty streets with small shops closing early and the Susquehanna River surface misty every morning. The Turner family still lived in the old house, like shadows. Margaret woke up every day at 7, brewed coffee, then sat at the kitchen table, looking at the small cup Grace used to use. The habit of writing letters became the only thing helping her feel she was still doing something for her child. She sent letters everywhere she could think of: the Baltimore Sun editorial office, regional police offices, even the state governor. The content was always the same: slanted handwriting. "Please don't forget her name. Please don't close the file." Most letters were never answered. Sometimes, she received envelopes back stamped, "No further action," or returned to sender. William Turner returned to the Navy, occasionally sending postcards from distant ports, with only a short line: "I'm still searching somewhere." But over time, the postcards became rarer. The relationship between the two grew distant, silence stretching like the mist covering the town. In 1973, a local radio station mentioned the case again in a segment, "Unsolved Disappearances," aired for 2 nights, then silent forever. Also that year, a new state law was passed, stipulating only cases with new evidence could be reopened for investigation. That meant Grace Turner's name was moved to the inactive file list. From then on, no one mentioned it. New neighbors moved in, unaware of the old story. The post office changed staff, and the wall, where Margaret once posted missing child flyers, was repainted yellow. Whenever children ran past the house, she would stand up, looking after them with unconscious eyes. Sometimes, she thought she heard Grace's laughter in the yard, but it was just wind through the trees. The house became somber, the closet still holding toys, white dress, and small tricycle untouched. She wouldn't let anyone touch them. By the late 70s, the press hardly mentioned old disappearances anymore. A new generation was born, preoccupied with other changes in America. Grace's name vanished from newspapers, remaining only in faint federal archive files. In Baltimore, a new clerk mistakenly read file code MD 478 GT67 as closed, adding an archive stamp to the cover, officially moving the case to non-public access. No one noticed, no one objected. The hairy one, the only evidence, still lay in the sealed glass tube in the Washington Archive basement, where temperature was maintained at 12 degrees C, cold white lights casting on endless long shelves. Outside the world, everything changed daily, but in that room, time seemed frozen. In 1978, William retired from the military and left Maryland, moving to Maine to work in a shipyard. He rarely contacted Margaret, only sending money regularly through the bank. She stayed, hair gradually graying, figure smaller than before, but still keeping the habit of writing a letter once a year. In the letter to the Baltimore Sun in 1979, she wrote the final line, "If anyone still remembers, please say my child's name once more." No one published it. That summer, while passing the Central Park, an old friend saw her sitting alone on a bench, next to the old photo of Grace in a cracked wooden frame. The photo, according to accounts, had faded almost transparent. When the sun set, she still hadn't left. The whole town seemed to have stopped believing in miracles. And as the 70s ended, Grace Turner's name was only a faint line in the memories of the elderly, while file MD 478 GT67 silently lay on the steel shelf, waiting for something no one hoped would come, a reason to be opened again. 2 decades passed after Grace Turner's case sank into oblivion, until the mid-1990s, when a new ray of hope emerged in the investigation community as the FBI officially deployed mitochondrial DNA analysis technology at the Quantico Forensic Center. At that time, Thomas Brooks, who had been the young investigator in charge of preserving file MD 478 GT67, had returned to Baltimore headquarters as a supervising agent after years in other units. He was now over 50, hair streaked with gray, but still kept his old habit at the end of each quarter. He walked through the old archive, where hundreds of cold cases lay quiet in the dark. One April morning in 1996, upon receiving an internal memo about the Forensic Renewal Initiative program, a project to revive old evidence using mitochondrial DNA technology, Brooks immediately thought of the tiny hair sample sealed since 1967. He dug up file MD 478 GT67, opened the old brown envelope, still bearing his young signature. Inside, the glass tube containing hair E1 was intact, the seal stamped clear. He took the sample to the technical room, briefly presented to the in-charge team. "This is evidence from a 1967 child abduction case, never analyzed. If the new technology allows, I want to try." The hair was entered into the pilot list and sent directly to the DNA lab at Quantico, where they were testing mitochondrial DNA extraction processes, a technique that could identify even if the sample was too old or partially degraded. Over 2 weeks later, results returned in a sealed envelope. The report stated briefly, sample E1 contains extremely low DNA content, insufficient for sequencing, cannot compare or match with any existing profiles. Brooks read that sentence over and over, feeling both disappointed and understanding that at least they had tried. In the forensic experts' notes section, there was a line, "Sample should be preserved in stable conditions for reanalysis when technology advances further. Based on that recommendation, the FBI transferred evidence E1 to the new storage program called Project Genesis Archive, a national initiative to preserve biological samples for unsolved cases. Brooks personally supervised the resealing process, watching the small glass tube placed in a metal box, sealed with anti-tamper tape, then stored in a dedicated cold compartment at Quantico's preservation vault. He signed confirmation on the record, then closed the file, adding a final handwritten line on the cover page. Sample E1, insufficient data. Recommend re-examination when technology permits. That simple sentence became his message to anyone who might continue the work in the future. That fall, Brooks received retirement decision after 30 years in the field. At the small farewell ceremony in the Baltimore headquarters hallway, he didn't mention achievements or big cases he had participated in, just paused a few seconds before the old file board, where Grace Turner's name was still on the yellowed index card. Colleagues recounted that before leaving, he opened his desk drawer, took out a small photo, the copy of Grace's picture he had kept since 1970, and left it in the file cabinet, right on top of MD 478 GT67. As he stepped out of the building, late afternoon light shone on the windows, reflecting the calm face of the aged man. He knew he would no longer have the chance to reopen that case, but a vague belief still lingered in him that at some point in the future, technology would be strong enough to pull the truth from the dust of time. At Quantico, the glass tube containing hair E1 was assigned new storage code, GT67 Genesis/Preserve01, placed in slot 42A. The metal door closed, the seal lock making a light click, and the room returned to quiet. Another chapter closed, but this time, instead of despair, there was at least a new note in the file, a tiny but real ray of hope that the story of the 4-year-old girl in Maryland still had a chance to be continued in another century. 12 years after the E1 hair sample was preserved in the Project Genesis archive storage, the Grace Turner case remained quietly listed under unresolved. Everyone once involved had retired or transferred, and the MD 478 GT67 file was only occasionally inventoried administratively, never opened. It wasn't until 2008 that a small detail surfaced in Virginia's civil database, but no one noticed. The Bureau of Vital Statistics recorded a death certificate for Evelyn Price, born June 4, 1933, matching exactly the birth date of Evelyn Collins, who had been investigated 40 years earlier. The certificate was issued at St. Mary's Hospital in Richmond, with the cause of death listed as chronic heart failure. In the records, Evelyn Price was noted as a widow with no relatives, the sole contact listed as Nancy Collins, recorded as an adopted daughter. A copy of the document was stored in the federal database, but no one at the FBI at the time cross-referenced it with old cases. Only a few months later did a state tax agency clerk discover the matching Social Security number between Evelyn Price and Evelyn Collins, but since the records were from the 1960s, it wasn't processed. In the small suburban neighborhood outside Richmond, where this woman had lived for over 20 years, neighbors described her as reserved, polite, and barely social. An elderly woman named Harriet Moore, who lived next door, later told a local reporter that Mrs. Price had an adopted daughter named Nancy, about 5 years old when they moved in. Very well behaved and quiet, but rarely left the house. According to Moore, Nancy called Mrs. Price Mom, and they lived together in the 2-story white-painted wooden house at the end of Brook Road, a quiet area 15 minutes drive from downtown. No one in the neighborhood suspected anything. They just knew the mother and daughter lived simply, without noise or strange visitors. Mrs. Price worked part-time as a nurse at a private clinic until around 1995, then retired fully, staying home to tend the garden and occasionally babysit for neighbors. The house was recorded in property records as purchased in 1971, in cash, without intermediaries. Those details only startled people later, but in 2008, no one saw them as unusual. When she died, the funeral was small and modest, attended by a few neighbors and a local church employee, handling the burial arrangements. None of them knew who Nancy Collins was, beyond her standing silently by the casket, her face composed, showing no emotion. After the service, she left, and the house was sold to a young couple a few months later. A law office clerk handling the property transfer remembered that the house records were strangely clean, all paperwork prepared in advance, with no loans or mortgages. He once asked the heir's representative about the asset's origin, but got only a cold reply. "That's personal savings." No one investigated further. At the time, federal record analysis technology was fragmented, without automated retrieval systems, so the link between the names Evelyn Price and Evelyn Collins stayed hidden in the database, untouched. In Baltimore, the Grace Turner case archive remained silent. The new custodian, Agent Miller, signed off on periodic inventories, noting no leads. That short phrase was repeated for years. Meanwhile, in Richmond, the house on Brook Road was renovated, the new owners knowing nothing of its past, only hearing vague neighbor talk that the old owner was a nurse, lived with a young child, and passed away quietly. Outside the fence, the old lilac tree Evelyn had planted upon moving in still bloomed every spring, its faint fragrance drifting in the wind. No one thought that in that peaceful house, 40 years earlier, answers to the disappearance that shook all of Maryland might have been hidden. But time had done its familiar work, dusting over every unanswered question. As 2008 ended, the FBI's periodic report on historical missing persons kept the same numbers, and Grace Turner's name stayed at position 127 on the list of children still not found. There were no additional notes, no one proposing to reopen the file, no one noticing the strange coincidence between two names, hundreds of miles apart. To the system, it was just static, meaningless data. To the outside world, the case had long been dead, and when the files were transferred to the new electronic system, Maryland 478 GT67 was marked closed archive. No activity, sealed once more, silent as 40 years before, when that child vanished without a trace. In 2013, in Richmond, Virginia, a 50-year-old woman named Nancy Collins, an art teacher at a public high school, applied for a passport to join an international teacher exchange program funded by the Department of Education. She was born and raised in Virginia, according to her file, the sole adopted child of a deceased nurse named Evelyn Price. Her birth certificate was submitted with the application, but during data verification, the passport agency employee spotted an anomaly. The birth certificate lacked a state archive number, the certification seal was misaligned, and the font didn't match the administrative template issued in 1963. When asked to provide more information, Nancy went to the State Vital Records Office for verification, but there, they found no original copy under Nancy Marie Collins. The clerk in charge thought it might be due to old records lost during the 1980s data digitization. However, upon further review, they noted the birth date on the document, July 18, 1963, didn't match any birth lists in Richmond for that period. Nancy felt confused, but thought it was just an administrative error. She had always believed Evelyn Price was her legal adoptive mother, who had cared for her since childhood and never hidden anything. Still, the incident made her start thinking. That evening, while rummaging through an old document box Evelyn had left, she found only a few medical papers, some old black and white photos, and a small sealed envelope with no sender's address. On the envelope was faint writing, "Nancy, keep this." Inside was just a photo of a girl about 4 years old, in a white dress standing in a yard, behind a wooden fence that wasn't their old house. Nancy stared at the photo for a long time, feeling a vague sense like a distant memory brushing against her. In her mind, childhood was fragmented pieces, a voice calling Gracie, a red cloth doll she never remembered where it came from, and recurring nightmares that jolted her awake at night. She had never told anyone, thinking it was just imagination. But after discovering the invalid birth certificate, those memory fragments began to unsettle her. A colleague friend advised her to try genealogical DNA testing, as companies like 23andMe or Ancestry DNA could now help identify genetic origins and distant relatives. Nancy hesitated at first, but decided to try it, just as a way to learn more about her past. In March 2013, she sent a saliva sample to 23andMe. While waiting for results, she nearly forgot about it, until an email arrived a few weeks later, notifying her the analysis was complete. The results showed 100% Northern European genetics, DNA matching common surnames in the New England region. But what caught her eye was a small note in the Family Finder section, stating no DNA relatives were detected with the Price or Collins surnames in the database. She didn't know what it meant, only that biologically, she had no matches with her adoptive mother's family. That question prompted her to dig deeper. On the 23andMe user community forum, Nancy read instructions on downloading raw data and syncing it with GEDmatch, an independent database where people worldwide shared DNA profiles to find lost relatives. One late April evening, she downloaded her file, filled in basic info, and clicked upload. The site displayed, "Your data will be processed within 48 hours. Nancy shut down the computer, expecting little. But that night, she tossed and turned, memories flooding back. She remembered the white dress in the photo, the doll with black eyes, and a faint perfume scent that Evelyn had never used. The next morning, she went to school and taught as usual, but her mind kept circling the question, if the birth certificate was wrong, and no DNA matched Collins, then who was she really? That evening, Nancy called the Vital Records office again, requesting a deeper search. The person in charge, after hearing the birth date and adoptive mother's name, said no matching records existed, but asked in return, "You say you were born in 1963 in Richmond? Strange, because this birth certificate number belongs to another child. File closed since 1967. That statement left Nancy stunned. She hung up and sat motionless in the living room for a long time. Outside the window, rain began to fall. When she looked again at the photo of the little girl in the envelope, she felt like the eyes in the picture were staring straight at her. She couldn't explain it, only knowing one thing. Everything she had believed for 50 years might not be true. And when her DNA data was fully processed, it wouldn't just answer who she was, but inadvertently touch a name forgotten in cold storage files for nearly half a century. 2 days after Nancy Collins uploaded her DNA data to GEDmatch, the server system at the Genetic Analysis Center in Florida recorded an unusual match signal. Among millions of profiles, her identifier code connected directly to one stored under cold case, missing children. The similarity level displayed on screen was 99.8%, nearly perfect match with the mitochondrial DNA sample from evidence, GT67 Genesis/Preserve01. The E1 hair strand from the 1967 Grace Turner disappearance. The comparison algorithm immediately sent an alert to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. In Baltimore, in the cold case unit room, the lieutenant in charge received an internal notification clearly stating, "Potential match detected, case MD 478 GT67. The name Grace Turner reappeared for the first time in nearly half a century. A sweep order was issued, and the case file was pulled from storage. Detective Laura Hensley, the unit's new investigator, was assigned to take over. She was a forensic specialist who had worked on many DNA identifications, known for her meticulousness. While reading the case summary, Hensley paused long at the line "Sole hair sample preserved at Quantico, recommend re-examination when technology permits." She recognized the handwritten pencil note, signed Thomas Brooks. The next day, Hensley drove to the FBI Evidence Storage Center in Quantico, where the Project Genesis archives still operated under high security. Under technician supervision, she signed the withdrawal form for sample GT67 Genesis/Preserve01, checking the seal. The red tape intact, Brooks's confirmation signature still clear. The glass tube held a fine golden hair strand almost transparent, nestled in soft cotton. The sample was transferred to the Federal DNA Lab, where they used next-generation mitochondrial DNA extraction technology, a method capable of recovering genetic data from tiny or degraded samples. The process took nearly 3 weeks, every step documented and cross-checked rigorously. Meanwhile, in Richmond, Nancy Collins received an email from GEDmatch saying her data had been linked to a federal investigation agency. She was confused, thinking it was a mistake. When she called the hotline, the operator said briefly, "We've forwarded your information to the FBI's cold case unit. They'll contact you." That night, she couldn't sleep, feeling like something was about to change that she didn't yet understand. 2 weeks later, in Baltimore, the full analysis results were sent to Hensley's desk. The 27-page report had the conclusion in bold. Mitochondrial DNA sample GT67 Genesis/Preserve 01 matches 99.8% with Nancy Marie Collins' genetic sample. High probability of direct maternal lineage. The room fell silent for a few seconds as Hensley finished reading. She looked up at the old photo of little Grace Turner in the file, bright eyes and shimmering golden hair, then at Nancy's photo in the GEDmatch file, the smile and facial contours eerily similar. That same day, she submitted the report to the unit commander. An emergency meeting was held, all cold case staff present. The regional director reread the summary. Evidence GT67, collected from 1967 child disappearance scene, confirmed DNA match with an individual currently living in Richmond, Virginia, under the name Nancy Collins. Preliminary conclusion: victim Grace Turner, presumed missing or murdered, is alive. A small team was formed to verify Nancy Collins' identity, reviewing all civil records, birth certificate, residency info, and medical history. Everything showed her life began in 1968, with no trace before that. No school records, no birth hospital records, no vaccination history, like the 4-year-old from that year, had suddenly appeared in the world with a completely new identity. By the third day, the final report reached the Baltimore FBI director's desk. The conclusion was short and chilling. Nancy Marie Collins. Actual identity: Grace Turner, born June 3, 1963, in Havre de Grace, Maryland. Status: alive. In the office, Hensley sat alone looking out the window, where sunset dyed the old brick FBI building red. She knew she had just touched a case dormant for half a century, and now, thanks to technology, a story thought ended was coming back to life. Before leaving the room, she reopened the old file, stopping at the last page with Thomas Brooks' signature. Next to the note he had left nearly 30 years earlier, she added a short sentence: analysis complete. E1 sample confirms identity. Grace Turner is alive. Then she signed her name, placed the file in a sealed envelope, and sent it to the commander's desk. As she left the building, the printer hummed steadily behind, outputting DNA data lines connecting two people, a child who vanished in 1967 and a 50-year-old woman living peacefully in Virginia, now merged into one single truth. Nancy Collins was Grace Turner, the girl who had the entire state of Maryland searching for half a century. Immediately after the DNA results were confirmed, the FBI Baltimore Cold Case Unit launched a comprehensive review to reconstruct the entire travel itinerary of suspect Evelyn Collins during the summer of 1967. Old archived data was transferred from the federal record storage, and hundreds of yellowed pages of documents were spread out on the large table in the investigation room. Detective Laura Hensley directly oversaw the task force analyzing secondary evidence, toll receipts, gas invoices, and personal notes remaining in the Collins file. The Maryland Transportation Authority toll receipts, obtained from the 1967 home search, were photographed clearly, including one dated July 18, 1967. The same day Grace Turner went missing, recording a vehicle with license plate MD 52-431 passing through the Havre de Grace, Elkton station at 10:22 a.m. The ink had smudged, but the words Elkton Toll Plaza were still legible. Based on this detail, Hensley and the technical team determined that Collins had left the town just a few hours after Grace disappeared. They continued reviewing transaction records from gas stations in the area during that time, finding a cash payment receipt for $1.27 at an Esso station in Cecil County, with the store's logbook noting the name E. Collins. From these two pieces of evidence, the travel route gradually took shape from Havre de Grace along Route 40 to Elkton, then turning south onto Route 13, connecting to Virginia. A reconstruction model using modern GIS software showed a journey of approximately 170 miles, with a travel time of 4 hours and 20 minutes, enough to reach the Richmond area before sunset. In the remaining archived storage from the 1967 home search, Hensley discovered a small cardboard box containing seized items that had never been cataloged. Inside were personal documents, a few hospital bills, sedative prescriptions, and a brown leather notebook with a few pages of fragmented notes. The handwriting was evenly slanted, with content mostly consisting of shopping lists and work schedules, but among the final pages were 3 lines that caught the investigation team's attention. July 18th, road trip south. Small shoes fit, she slept most of the way. Those lines were confirmed to be written by Evelyn Collins herself. The line, "Small shoes fit. The small shoes fit perfectly," left the entire team silent. Hensley requested a re-examination of the handwriting, and the results confirmed a complete match with Collins's signature samples from medical records. This was the first evidence indicating she had left Maryland with Grace. Next, the digital forensics team began restoring data from old Polaroid photos, also seized from the same evidence box. Most of the images had faded, but on the back of one taken in 1968 was written Spring, Richmond. The photo showed a blonde girl in a white dress standing in front of a wooden fence, holding a red cloth doll. In the background was a porch with architecture typical of Southern Virginia, matching perfectly with descriptions of Evelyn Collins's later-known home on Brook Road in Richmond. The experts compared the image of the child in the photo with a picture of Grace Turner at age 4, and facial recognition software yielded a 97% similarity match. Hensley carefully placed the two photos side by side, one of the girl who disappeared in Maryland, one of the child standing in the suspect's yard, the same hair, the same posture, only differing in a calmer expression, eyes looking into the distance, not smiling. She knew this meant Grace Turner had been alive at least 1 year after the abduction. The preliminary report was sent to command that same evening. In the summary, Hensley wrote, "The most logical travel route of the suspect, determined through receipts and evidence, includes 1 Havre de Grace, Elkton, 2 Esso Station, Cecil County, 3 Richmond, Virginia. Indications show the subject settled in Richmond immediately after the crime. 1968 photo confirms the victim was alive at least until the following spring. When presenting the report to the Interagency Council, all experts agreed that the itinerary was the most logical in terms of time and geography." Hensley requested the Polaroid be archived as new evidence, coded GT67 Evidence 02, and sent the photo to the National Image Analysis Center for color detail restoration. Under infrared light, technicians discovered a small sign hanging on the back porch with faded lettering, Virginia Nursing Association, confirming the photographer was Evelyn Collins, who at that time worked part-time for a private clinic. Cross-referencing with Virginia State Nursing Association personnel records showed she had been licensed to practice in September 1967, just 2 months after the disappearance. Every detail linked together, forming a complete picture of how she left Maryland, changed her residence, and started a new life with the child under a different name. When Hensley looked at the Polaroid photo again, she saw in the frame the little girl standing in soft sunlight, holding the doll, eyes wide open, as if gazing through 46 years of time, back to the truth that was finally being affirmed. Grace Turner had lived, had existed, and had traveled with the woman named Evelyn Collins from Maryland to Virginia on that fateful summer morning road in 1967. Once the report on Evelyn Collins's travel route was finalized, the investigation team continued reviewing old administrative documents to determine the origin of the beige Chevrolet Impala that had appeared in the case. In the vehicle records stored at the Maryland Department of Transportation, 1967 paperwork showed the car was not registered to Evelyn Collins, but owned by a man named Charles McMillan, born in 1930, residing in Elkton, about 40 miles east of Havre de Grace. A handwritten note, vehicle purchaser, Evelyn Collins, was added at the bottom of the registration form, indicating the two had a close financial or personal relationship. Hensley immediately requested a check of McMillan's personal records. The old files were transferred from state archives, yellowed and frayed at the edges. They noted McMillan had been a mechanical repair technician working at a garage near Route 40, with no prior criminal record. When the FBI contacted the Personnel Records Agency, they discovered he had died in 1972 in a car accident in Caroline County, Maryland. The accident report stated he was driving a small truck loaded with construction materials, lost control, and veered into a ditch. The investigation concluded no signs of foul play. Nevertheless, McMillan's name linked to Collins's Impala shifted the investigation in a new direction. Hensley requested reopening old bank records where Collins had an account. They included several 1967 cash withdrawal receipts, many coinciding with the time she left Maryland, signed EC, but with a small note beside them reading CM Pickup, indicating McMillan may have handled the transactions directly. The analysis team continued reviewing Evelyn's notebook, finding 2 handwritten letters that had gone unnoticed in the initial review. The paper had yellowed, the handwriting slanted, with content mostly personal notes, but in one letter with no addressee was the line, "Charles helped me leave Maryland. He said no one would find me if I went south. I owe him more than thanks." That short sentence was enough to confirm a direct connection between Collins and McMillan at the time of the abduction. Handwriting experts compared this letter segment with Collins's leave request form and concluded a complete match. Hensley believed McMillan may have driven the Impala out of Maryland, helping Evelyn conceal her movements in the initial days after the crime. To strengthen this assessment, the investigation team accessed McMillan's 1972 accident insurance records, discovering in the beneficiary list the name E. Collins, listed as the sole emergency contact. Though the insurance payout was only $2,000, it proved a close relationship lasting at least until his death. An elderly neighbor of McMillan's, now over 80, told FBI agents that in the summer of 1967, he often saw McMillan with an unfamiliar brown-haired woman. They drove the beige car along Route 40 several times, then suddenly vanished. No one in the neighborhood knew who the woman was, only remembering she wore a nurse's uniform. This witness was documented in the report, but lacked sufficient legal basis to reopen an investigation into McMillan, since he had been dead for over 40 years. In the cold case unit's meeting room, Hensley presented the final report on this lead. She projected a 1967 route map on the screen, marking key points: Havre de Grace, Elkton, where McMillan lived and worked, then straight down to Richmond, where Collins settled. The diagram showed McMillan as the perfect intermediary link, providing the vehicle, mechanical knowledge, and possibly escorting Collins out of state before police set up roadblocks. When she read the excerpt from the handwritten letter, "Charles helped me leave Maryland," the room fell silent. Everyone understood this was no longer speculation. In the conclusion report submitted to command, Hensley wrote, "Charles McMillan, personal friend and associate of Evelyn Collins, provided the vehicle and travel assistance during the time of the crime. Based on documents and handwritten letter, role as accomplice confirmed. Current status: deceased 1972, no prosecution." The report was approved the same day. Hensley sat back after the meeting, looking at an old photo of the beige Impala. It was the first and only object linking Collins, McMillan, and Grace Turner, the car that disappeared from Maryland on that July 1967 morning. Now, both adults from that journey were dead, leaving only the child from back then. Now a woman living in the modern world, carrying a story that numbers, receipts, and letters had just helped the world reconnect. And as the final note was typed into the system, case file MD 478, GT67, officially added one more name: Charles McMillan, with the simple annotation, sole accomplice, deceased. During the review of Evelyn Collins's old assets in Richmond, the investigation team led by Detective Laura Hensley discovered an important personal piece of evidence stored in local evidence lockers since 2008 that had never been examined in detail before. It was a small brown leather-bound notebook found in the attic of the Brook Road house after Collins's death. The notebook was wrapped in linen cloth, along with a few old photos and prescription slips. When opened, the pages were yellowed, with clear, neat, and even handwriting, matching the style in the confirmed handwritten letters by Evelyn. The contents spanned from September 1966 to mid-1968, covering the period of the abduction and the first year after leaving Maryland. The early pages were brief notes about daily life, shifts, patients, prescriptions, ordinary reminders like buy milk, send letter to Helen. However, starting from page 13, the tone changed. Evelyn wrote that she could not bear the emptiness, that the small empty room made me hear my own heartbeat. In another section, the handwriting bolder, I lost the baby, and with it a part of myself. Everyone says, pray, but God doesn't listen. I need to be a mother, once more. In many subsequent pages, she described recurring obsessions with the death of the fetus after a miscarriage in November 1966. An entry from early 1967, every night I dream of holding a child. It has no face, but I hear it call Mom. Maybe I'm losing my mind. The notebook showed clear signs of post-traumatic psychological disorder, with cycles of unstable emotions, from regret to self-consolation. On the page dated June 15, 1967, just 1 month before the crime, she wrote, "No one understands that I can't continue living in this silence. I need to start over. There's a little girl who often comes with her mother to the post office. She has blue eyes. When I look at her, I feel I can still be forgiven." That line left the entire investigation team silent. Hensley read each page, noting them in chronological order. FBI criminal psychology analysts concluded that Evelyn showed no signs of crime for money or grudge. Her actions bore the characteristics of replacement desire, a craving to replace the lost child with another, to compensate for psychological trauma. The following pages proved this. I didn't harm her. I just wanted her to have a safe place where no one could take her from me again. Investigators determined that throughout the time after leaving Maryland, Evelyn cared for Grace as her own child, taking her to doctors, photographing her, and registering her under the fake name Nancy. All matched data from Nancy Collins' medical records at a local clinic in 1968. With Evelyn listed as guardian, there was no evidence of abuse, coercion, or extortion. The entire chain of actions seemed driven by the delusion that she could fix her life by raising another child. In the notebook, the final page from May 1968 read, "She smiled at me today, called me Mom. Maybe the world is giving me a second chance. I will never let anyone know about this, ever." Below that line was the signature EC and a smudged ink mark, perhaps from tears. Hensley carefully closed the notebook and handed it to the forensic specialist for sealing under code GT67, evidence 03. In the report to superiors, she concluded, based on personal diary, no signs of abuse or financial motive exist. Criminal behavior arose from post-child loss psychological disorder, leading to replacement motive. Case determined as replacement kidnapping. The report was signed and filed with all new evidence. As Hensley left the room, she stood looking through the glass at the red brick storage building where the case evidence had been kept for nearly half a century. All the big questions about the crime seemed answered, but those lines in the small notebook, written by a broken woman seeking motherhood in desperation, left a heavy feeling. On the table, the 1968 Polaroid of Grace Turner lay next to the notebook, two milestones linked like evidence of a paradoxical truth in the pain and mistake of Evelyn Collins. The abducted child had truly been kept alive and raised under a different name in a life that no one, including herself, could have imagined would take them so far. After the investigation and analysis results from Evelyn Collins's notebook were completed, FBI Baltimore moved to the final verification phase to confirm Nancy Collins's biological identity with the Turner family. Forensics experts contacted the Maryland State Archives to retrieve DNA samples from Grace's direct relatives, including hair from Margaret Turner, stored in hospital records from 1975, and a blood sample from William Turner collected before his death in 1994. Although William had passed away, his DNA was still preserved in military data archives due to his Navy service, making comparison feasible. The samples were sent to the Quantico lab along with Nancy Collins's data for multi-layer comparison, mitochondrial, chromosomal, and nuclear genes. The final results, announced in late December 2013, confirmed a perfect match, 100% with the mother's genes, and 50% with the father's. The official report stated, Nancy Marie Collins, born 1963, is the biological daughter of William and Margaret Turner, missing from Havre de Grace, Maryland, on July 18, 1967. When that conclusion was printed, the entire cold case unit fell silent. The name Grace Turner, after 46 years in the unresolved category, was officially changed to located, alive. On January 4, 2014, a closed-door meeting was held at FBI Baltimore headquarters. Margaret Turner, now nearly 80, was brought in under the care of social workers. The elderly woman lived quietly in a nursing home near Wilmington, in poor health but with a sharp mind. When she received the call from Special Agent Laura Hensley, she thought they just wanted to ask about old records again, unable to imagine what she was about to hear. In the meeting room, Hensley softly announced, Mrs. Turner, we have news that needs confirmation. Your DNA matches perfectly with an individual named Nancy Collins in Virginia. She is your daughter, Grace Turner. Margaret froze, her trembling hands clutching Hensley's. After a few seconds of silence, she could only whisper, the little one. Is she still alive? The room sank into quiet, with only the sound of the unit director's pen signing the confirmation. After the meeting, the FBI arranged a reunion between mother and daughter in a private conference room at headquarters. On the morning of January 10, 2014, Nancy Collins, or more accurately, Grace Turner, was invited to Baltimore under the pretext of cooperating with identity investigation. She entered the old gray stone building, unaware that inside, her biological mother was waiting. When the door opened, the two women looked at each other without speaking. Margaret stood up, small in stature, her face etched with time. Grace looked at her, and in a flash, distant memories surfaced. The image of a young woman bending down to button a little girl's coat, the faint smell of coffee in the kitchen, the familiar sound of a voice she had never quite remembered. She walked over slowly, then softly said one word. Mom? Margaret burst into tears, wrapping her arms tightly around her, as if letting go would make this miracle vanish. The entire room stood still, no one speaking. After nearly half a century, the reunion needed no explanation. An FBI specialist documented the moment in the report, describing emotions beyond legal language. After the meeting, the two were arranged to stay at the center for a few days to complete official identity confirmation procedures. The media, though not yet permitted to release details, quickly spread the news through internal channels. By the weekend, the headline Cold Case Maryland Solved, after 46 years, Missing Girl Found Alive, appeared on the front page of the Baltimore Sun, then nationwide. Television stations replayed old 1967 footage of the 4-year-old's disappearance next to the red doll, contrasting with current images of the middle-aged blonde woman, her blue eyes retaining the same gaze from years ago. Public reaction exploded, a mix of astonishment and emotion. Hundreds of messages and letters poured into the FBI, congratulating the Turner family, with many saying they had grown up with fear of that abduction, and now it felt like a part of their memory was closed. That same evening, Hensley was invited to speak at a brief press conference. She simply said, "We didn't just close a file, we brought someone back to where she belongs." That night, national networks aired a short clip from the reunion. The image of the elderly mother holding her daughter's hand in the brightly lit FBI room became a symbol of hope that never dies in long-term missing persons cases. In Havre de Grace, where it all began, the old Turner family home still stood, with neighbors hanging lights out front, as they had done years ago during the search. A small sign was placed on the central post office, engraved Grace Turner, missing 1967, found 2013, hope never dies. In the cold night, the lights reflected on the Susquehanna River, just like 46 years earlier, when the town first heard police sirens in the darkness. This time, the only sound remaining was the wind, and the soft sigh of relief from those who had waited too long for an ending no one dared believe could happen. Immediately after the reunion between Margaret and Grace Turner was confirmed, the FBI, in coordination with the Virginia police, implemented the final step in strengthening the legal file, re-examining all remaining assets and evidence of Evelyn Collins in Richmond. Although the house on Brook Road had been sold again in 2008, the transfer records and the attic where Collins's belongings were once stored remained sealed under a preservation order for evidence. On January 15, 2014, the investigation team consisting of representatives from FBI Baltimore and the Richmond Police Department returned to the scene for a final sweep. The house now belonged to a young family who agreed to allow a full inspection of the entire attic and old storage area. Beneath a thick layer of dust, in a small wooden box placed against the corner wall, the technical staff discovered an old leather envelope containing a stack of administrative papers and Evelyn's personal medical records. The first sheet was a copy of a birth certificate in the name Nancy Marie Collins, issued in Richmond on August 5, 1968, with the mother listed as Evelyn Collins and the father as unknown. Upon checking the file code, the Vital Records Office confirmed that this was not an official Virginia state printed form. The seal was faded, the engraving had incorrect font, and the certifying signer did not exist in the list of public officials at that time. Microscopic analysis revealed that the paper was typed on a 1965 typewriter, most likely a forgery created by Evelyn herself to legalize Grace's identity. In the same document box, the investigation team also found a vaccination booklet and a medical examination card in the name of Nancy Collins, established in 1969 at a local clinic, bearing Evelyn's signature as guardian. Each piece of evidence was coded and sealed separately, then transferred to the FBI's storage facility. During the continued inspection, a forensic officer discovered beneath the floorboards in the northwest corner of the attic a small tin box wrapped in cloth. When opened, inside were a pair of white children's leather shoes, old and yellowed with time. The inner label read Mary Jane, size 6, exactly the shoe size that Grace Turner had worn according to her mother's records in 1967. One lace was broken, but the rest remained clean, indicating careful storage. Hensley was present at the scene when the evidence was found. She stood staring at the shoes in silence for a long time, then requested on-site photography and coding as GT67 evidence 04. Per forensic protocol, the evidence was packaged in a separate nitrogen-filled box to prevent leather degradation. In the attached report, the technician noted, "Good preservation condition, likely matching the shoes recorded in the Turner family seizure report from 1967, identified as the victim's personal item at the time of disappearance." Additionally, the team collected several other Polaroid photos of young Nancy, along with a few unsent letters from Evelyn, mostly unfinished drafts without recipients, discussing raising a child alone and keeping secrets to protect the little one. These pieces of evidence were incorporated into the comprehensive file, forming a direct chain linking Evelyn Collins to the 1967 kidnapping. The Virginia police completed the scene report and sent it to FBI Baltimore by the end of the day. In the summary report, Hensley clearly stated, "The forged birth certificate for Nancy Collins confirms the act of creating an alternate identity. The old shoes match the victim's item characteristics, strengthening evidence of unlawful possession and rearing. No signs of coercion or harm, but sufficient evidence to affirm kidnapping and concealment of identity." The report, along with all evidence, was forwarded to the Central Analysis Unit, finalizing the ultimate legal traceability file. The next day, Images of the evidence were presented at the summary meeting. The small shoes, the fake birth certificate, the vaccination card, all arranged side by side on the projection screen. The remaining material fragments of a story that had spanned 46 years. During the meeting, the Richmond Police Department representative confirmed no other evidence remained and agreed to transfer full handling authority to the FBI. Hensley signed the final report, her handwriting slow but resolute. When the meeting ended, she lingered alone in the room, gazing at the photo of the children's shoes on the screen. In the quiet room, she thought of the long years Grace Turner had lived under a different name, of the woman who had committed the crime just to fill the void of loss. The evidence before her, simple, aged, now served as proof of the entire journey, binding tragedy, mistake, and the miracle of rebirth in the same case. As the lights dimmed and the screen faded, she knew the file was complete, and the ultimate truth of the Grace Turner case was now fully documented with irrefutable evidence. On February 20, 2014, after more than 6 months of expanded investigation and legal file completion, the Federal Bureau of Investigation officially released the final concluding report on the Grace Turner disappearance, a case that had lasted 46 years and was once considered one of Maryland's oldest cold cases. At a press conference held at FBI Baltimore headquarters, representatives from the Cold Case Unit and the Mid-Atlantic Regional Director announced the nearly 200-page document compiling all DNA test results, physical evidence, witness statements, and criminal psychology analysis. The report opened with bold text, case reference, MD 478 GT 67 and status solved. The main content identified the primary perpetrator as Evelyn Collins, born 1933, a nurse at Havre de Grace Hospital, who carried out the intentional child abduction on July 18, 1967. The motive was determined not to involve ransom or grudge, but stemmed from severe psychological disorder following a miscarriage, leading to the act of replacing the lost child with another, identified as 4-year-old Grace Turner. The sole accomplice, Charles McMillan, a mechanic technician, provided transportation and assisted Collins in leaving Maryland on the day of the incident. McMillan died in a traffic accident in 1972, so no basis for prosecution remained. The report detailed the process by which Collins created a fake identity for Grace using the birth certificate Nancy Marie Collins and raised her in Richmond, Virginia, for the next 50 years. The supporting evidence section listed 12 key items: hair sample E1 matching DNA, 1968, Polaroid photos, personal diary, handwritten letters, fake birth certificate, children's shoes, and Collins's administrative documents. The report emphasized no signs of abuse, coercion, or additional crimes. All evidence indicated the victim was cared for and raised as a biological child. Nevertheless, legally, the kidnapping and identity alteration constituted serious federal crimes. In the conclusion, the FBI declared the Grace Turner case, disappearance in Havre de Grace, Maryland, 1967, is determined to be an intentional child abduction perpetrated by Evelyn Collins with assistance from accomplice Charles McMillan. The victim was located alive under the fake legal name Nancy Collins. File status: solved and closed. The report was signed by the FBI Baltimore Director, the National Forensic Director, and the Maryland Department of Justice representative. Attached appendices included evidence photos, DNA comparison copies, living witness statement transcripts, and Collins's death records. After release, the file was sent to the National Crime Information Center, updating the status from missing to recovered. The event was immediately covered by major media outlets. The Washington Post described the case as a testament to the power of modern forensic technology and the persistence of federal investigators. CNN and NBC aired special reports, releasing official report excerpts along with images of the recovered white shoes from Collins' home. The American public followed the story with astonishment and emotion, as a file thought forever buried in the past was now decoded through a tightly linked chain of evidence bridging past and present. In her statement at the press conference, Detective Laura Hensley, representing the investigation team, said, "We didn't just close a case, we restored a person's identity. Justice here doesn't mean punishment, but the restoration of truth." Following the announcement, the comprehensive report was archived at the National Archives and the FBI's Evidence Preservation Vault in Quantico, where hair sample E1 and the white shoes were placed in a separate compartment beside a new label. Case resolved. Solved cold case #MD 478 GT67. In Havre de Grace, local authorities also received a copy of the report. The town hall flew flags at half-mast for one day, as a symbol of remembrance for all missing victims never found. For the local residents, the Grace Turner story became a symbol of enduring faith in justice, even if it took nearly half a century to be acknowledged. As the conference ended, Hensley remained in her office, looking out the window where the sunset glowed over the distant Susquehanna River. On the desk, the thick file was sealed with a red closed stamp. She knew this was not just the end of a case, but the conclusion of an obsession spanning generations of investigators. Those who ensured Grace Turner's name did not vanish with time. After the FBI released the official report on the Grace Turner case, national public opinion exploded in an unprecedented wave of interest in long-term missing persons files. American media unanimously covered the story, with major television networks like NBC, CNN, and CBS airing week-long special reports, emphasizing forensic science and the role of DNA in solving a case seemingly forgotten for nearly half a century. The New York Times published an editorial titled, "The Girl Who Came Back," asserting that this was not just a victory for technology, but a reminder that justice, no matter how delayed, can still arrive. In Maryland, the story became the focus of state congressional hearings. In June 2015, the state government officially passed the Turner Act, mandating permanent storage of biological samples and evidence related to missing persons or unsolved cases. The new law required all investigative agencies in the state to retain DNA testable evidence indefinitely and permitted the use of genealogical genetic databases to trace identities in old cases. The act passed with near-unanimous legislative support, becoming the first U.S. precedent for legalizing long-term biological evidence preservation in criminal investigation. Lawmakers called it the legacy of the Grace Turner case. At the signing ceremony, the governor stated, "Without the persistence of investigators and the power of DNA, we would never have this day." The Turner Act will ensure no other case falls into oblivion simply because technology lagged behind. Soon after, the Federal Department of Justice expanded a similar project nationally, partnering with the FBI to launch the Legacy Evidence Initiative to review over 2,000 cold cases across the United States. Within a year, more than 150 cases were reopened, many involving child disappearances from the 1960s, 1980s. The Grace Turner story was cited in criminal investigation training courses as a prime example of the importance of evidence preservation and faith in forensic technology. On television, the PBS-produced documentary Finding Grace achieved record viewership, airing in over 20 countries. The story prompted the public to question thousands of unsolved disappearances. Numerous social organizations emerged to support families with long-missing relatives. In Havre de Grace, the central post office, where Grace vanished in 1967, was renovated into a small memorial, with the wall inscribed, "In memory of the missing and the hope that endures." In Washington, the National DNA Data Center added a storage room named Turner Room, housing exemplary evidence from DNA-solved cases. A photo of Grace Turner, a smiling blonde girl with a red doll, was framed in glass at the center. The story also sparked widespread academic debate on the boundary between justice and forgiveness. Many psychologists analyzed how the case forced society to reconsider approaches to criminals with mental disorders. Numerous articles and research papers appeared, emphasizing the humane element in criminal investigations, viewing Grace Turner as proof of human redemption, even in error. The event influenced popular culture, films, novels, and true crime podcasts, inspired by the case proliferated, making the phrase solved cold case #MD 478 GT67 a familiar symbol of modern investigative achievement. In American society, Grace Turner was no longer a victim, but a symbol of the belief that no truth is buried forever. And with the Turner Act and hundreds of other reopened cases, the legacy of the incident extended far beyond a closed file. It changed how America viewed the past, justice, and the enduring power of memory. After public interest subsided, and the case was officially recorded as solved cold case #MD 478 GT67, Grace Turner, who had lived half a century under the name Nancy Collins, began the difficult journey to reclaim her true identity. The legal process lasted nearly 8 months, with direct support from the FBI and the Maryland Department of Justice. On October 9, 2014, at the Harford County Courthouse, a public hearing was held to restore the birth name Grace Marie Turner. As the judge read the decision, she stood up, her voice trembling slightly. "I've lived my whole life with a name that wasn't mine. Today, I get to be the person my parents named." The room fell silent, broken only by light applause from attendees. A new birth certificate copy was issued the same day, noting reinstated identity, confirmed by FBI 2014. The event was referenced in the press as a symbolic milestone for identity restoration in historical missing persons cases. Afterward, Grace decided to leave Richmond and return to Maryland, living near the Havre de Grace area, where it all began. Initially, she lived reclusively, spending most of her time caring for her mother, Margaret Turner, who was then frail. But gradually, Grace found new meaning in helping others. In 2015, she officially joined the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children as a special advisor, focusing on supporting families with long-missing children. In her first speech at the organization's annual conference in Alexandria, Grace spoke slowly but firmly. "I don't remember the moment I was taken, but I know the silence of those forgotten years. No family should have to live with that silence." Her words prompted the entire audience to stand and applaud. In the following years, Grace Turner became the face of campaigns raising awareness about child abduction crimes. She appeared on television, in community education programs, and frequently visited schools, talking to students about personal safety, faith, and hope. She never spoke of Evelyn Collins with hatred. In a PBS interview, Grace said, "She did wrong, but she was also the one who raised me, taught me love. I can't erase the past, but I can turn it into something useful." This quote was widely cited, becoming the central message of the Voices Recovered program, a project Grace founded with NCMEC, guiding abduction victims and trauma survivors in rebuilding their lives. Under her leadership, the project expanded to over 10 states, helping hundreds find relatives or receive psychological support. Outside work, Grace maintained simple habits. She lived in a small house by the river, painted landscapes, and volunteered to teach art at the local high school, a profession she had pursued for nearly 30 years under the name Nancy. In class, she often told students about the importance of memory, how everyone should preserve their own traces. One student recounted that on her classroom wall hung a small handwritten sign, "Let others find you, with light, not darkness." In 2016, Grace was honored by NCMEC with the Hope Award for her contributions to victim support. That same year, she spoke at the center's 30th anniversary celebration, briefly but emotionally. "I am proof that time cannot erase truth. Only people can decide how to live on with that truth." Her words moved many to tears, including FBI investigators who had worked the case. Though she could have settled into anonymity, Grace chose otherwise. She continued community projects, university workshops, sharing psychological recovery experiences for those deprived of identity. On social media, she used her real name and often posted her own paintings, mostly Maryland landscapes and Susquehanna River scenes, where memory and present merged. In 2017, In a Time magazine interview, when asked how she defined freedom, Grace simply smiled. "It's when I can sign my real name for the first time." Grace Turner. Her life, from an anonymous missing persons file, now became a symbol of memory's rebirth and the power of compassion. She not only reclaimed her name, but turned her story into a promise to others. Sometimes returning is not just being found, but finding oneself. 1 year after the day of reunion, when the spring of 2015 had just returned to Havre de Grace, Margaret Turner took her last breath in her sleep, at the age of 81. She passed away quietly at home, beside her daughter, the one she had waited nearly half a century to see again. In her final months, Margaret's health gradually weakened, but her spirit was more serene than ever. Neighbors recounted that every morning, she still sat in the old wicker chair by the window, holding a cup of tea and smiling as she gazed out at the Susquehanna River, where she had waded through those hopeless years. Grace often sat beside her, reading aloud the letters of support sent from across the country, strangers writing that their story had made them believe in miracles, that hope could transcend time itself. In her last days, Margaret held her daughter's hand, her voice soft as a passing breeze. "You've come back. That's enough. Mom can rest now." When she passed, Grace organized a small memorial service at St. John's Church, where her mother had once prayed weekly during the long years of searching. The service was simple yet deeply moving, attended only by a few relatives, old friends, and a representative from FBI Baltimore. Detective Laura Hensley was also there, sitting in the back row, quietly watching the woman who had once been the center of the case she had pursued for nearly her entire career. In her short eulogy, Grace stood at the podium, her voice calm but filled with emotion. "My mother spent her whole life searching for me, but it was that very search that helped me find myself. She didn't need to see justice served, she only needed to see that I was still alive. And now I believe she is at peace." After the service, Margaret's ashes were scattered into the Susquehanna River, right where she had once released the first paper lantern on the anniversary night of her child's disappearance years ago. Grace bent down to the water, letting her hand touch the cold but gentle flow as a belated farewell. That image was captured by an NPMX photographer and later became the closing photo in the documentary, Finding Grace. In the months that followed, Grace returned to her work at NPMX but reduced her schedule, dedicating more time to herself. She traveled across Maryland, visiting the places her mother had set foot in while searching for her child: old houses, post offices, parks, even the dirt road she had walked in desperation. She took notes, photographed, and painted a series of artworks titled "The Places She Waited, The Places Mother Waited." The series was exhibited at the Maryland Historical Museum later that year, drawing thousands of visitors. In a letter to a friend, Grace wrote, "I don't know if memories can heal, but I know that when we look back at the past with love instead of fear, it will no longer be a wound." Those words served as a quiet summation of everything this case had brought, not just the truth, but ultimate peace. After the memorial, FBI Baltimore officially closed the final appendix of file MD 478 GT67. In the notes section, a line was added below "Closed, all parties deceased or located, family reconciled." The Turner family home was later kept by Grace, not sold, as a place to preserve memories. On the wooden table by the window, she placed an old photo of her mother holding 4-year-old Grace, along with a small frame engraved with the words, "We found each other." Every year, on July 18th, she lights a candle in front of the door, not to commemorate the loss, but to celebrate the day of starting over. For the town of Havre de Grace, the Grace Turner case closed not just with a report, but as a symbol of faith and resilience. The people here still tell the younger generation the story as a lesson in hope, that sometimes, things thought lost forever can still return, just in a different form. And for Grace, the most important thing was not the ending, but how everything finally became settled: a mother laid to rest, a child who found her roots, and the world finally stopping its questions about what had happened. because the answer now lay in the river, in the wind, and in the peace they had to traverse half a century to reclaim. Although the Grace Turner case file was officially closed and the family found peace after half a century, in the world of investigation and forensics, many questions still lingered, small but haunting gaps that made people realize not every mystery could be neatly wrapped in a report. Among them, the detail that drew the most attention from experts was the fake birth certificate under the name Nancy Marie Collins. Although forensic analysis confirmed it was not printed on Virginia state forms, investigators found no equipment or similar paper among Evelyn Collins's belongings. The ink and typing style indicated the certificate was produced on a 1964 Remington typewriter, a rare model typically found only in government offices or medical facilities at the time. This led investigators to suspect that Collins may have received help from another individual with access to administrative documents or internal authority in the civil registry system. A subsidiary file was reopened by the Virginia Department of Justice in 2016 to trace the person behind the forgery, but no results have been found to date. Some scattered clues suggested Collins may have worked part-time at a private clinic near City Hall, where she knew an administrative employee who retired around the time of the incident. However, that person died in 1980, leaving no opportunity for interrogation. The second question, equally controversial, was the possibility of other victims. In Evelyn's diary, besides entries about Grace, there was a short passage dated October 1966, where she wrote, "The first time I tried, but I didn't have enough courage." This prompted many to wonder if Collins had planned to approach another child before Grace. The FBI reviewed missing persons cases in the Maryland-Delaware area during that period and discovered a temporary disappearance of a 6-year-old girl in Elkton, but the victim was found safe just a few hours later. There was no direct evidence linking Collins to the incident, yet the diary detail remained in the file as an unexcluded hypothetical possibility. These ambiguities became topics of study in criminal investigation courses at the FBI Academy in Quantico, where the Grace Turner case was included in the curriculum as a classic example of restorative justice. The process of restoring truth and identity rather than punishment. Instructors often began lessons with the question, does justice truly end when a case is closed, or does it only begin when the truth is acknowledged? For law and criminology students, the case opened new approaches, viewing crime not just through behavior, but through psychological roots, human context, and era. On a societal level, the legacy left by the case went beyond the Turner Act or the hundreds of reopened cold cases. It also changed how the public viewed the meaning of DNA. From a technical tool, DNA became a symbol of memory, proof that truth could exist independently of time. At a national forensic conference in 2018, the photo of the white shoes and the glass vial containing Grace's hair strand, E1, were displayed in a glass case, alongside a caption, "Evidence doesn't speak, but it always waits for someone to listen." That image became a symbol of the belief that every unfinished story could be retold if people were patient enough to search. In Virginia, the Department of Justice's subsidiary file remained open under Code VJ-16's Collins subfile to continue verifying unresolved details. Even if results may never be known, keeping the file open was seen as a way to respect the truth, accepting that justice is not always absolute, but the pursuit of it never stops. In professional seminars, people still referred to Grace Turner as a milestone. The first case in the U.S. where genealogical DNA technology helped re-identify a victim's identity after nearly half a century, not to punish the perpetrator, but to restore the lost person's identity. In Havre de Grace, the story's legacy lived on in small details: the candle lit annually in front of the old post office, the memorial plaque engraved with "Found Through Truth," and in the hearts of the people, the memory of the 4-year-old girl who was found when everyone thought it impossible. The Grace Turner case ended, but the remaining questions became an inevitable part of history, a reminder that sometimes justice lies not in absolute closure, but in the world learning to listen to the voice of the past and never letting it fall silent again. The story of Grace Turner is not just a case solved after nearly half a century. It also deeply reflects the core values in modern American society: faith in justice, the power of science, and the ability to heal through compassion. In a country where technology advances daily and information spreads faster than ever, this case reminds us that progress lies not only in techniques, but in how people use them to restore what was lost. The tiny hair sample stored for over 40 years in the FBI's evidence vault, ultimately confirming Nancy Collins's true identity, is proof of the importance of perseverance and data preservation in criminal investigation. From that detail, the lesson for today's life is: in a world quick to forget, small things can still hold the power to change everything if preserved properly. Grace's journey from abducted victim to community education program host reminds us of the capacity to heal and turn pain into positive action. When she chose to forgive Evelyn Collins, who stole her childhood but also raised her for many years, Grace demonstrated a profound aspect of American culture. Justice is not just punishment, but also an opportunity for people to be restored. In today's American society, where many face trauma, loss, and division, that story calls us to believe that truth and kindness can coexist. That sometimes, the right action is not finding someone to blame, but ceaselessly seeking ways to connect, heal, and let the light of the past guide the present. If you believe that truth and compassion can transcend time, subscribe to the channel to join us in continuing the journey of exploring cases closed with hope. Thank you for following the story of Grace Turner. See you in the next video, where justice and faith always find their way back.